Rain poured heavily as Rose opened the door of her apartment and found a large box slowly moving on the doorstep, accompanied by a faint sound that resembled the soft crying of a small creature trapped in darkness. Rose froze, her heart pounding rapidly as if something unusual was hiding inside the brown cardboard box. The night air felt sharply cold against her skin, and the scent of wet asphalt mixed with the jasmine fragrance from the small garden on her balcony. She stared at the box for several seconds, trying to convince herself that she wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion after her intense schedule of rehearsals and recordings. The faint whimper came again, clearer, more pleading. Her hands trembled as she knelt down and untied the black ribbon wrapped around the box. When she lifted the lid, a cream-colored puppy with large round eyes stared at her, wagging its tail weakly. Around the puppy's neck hung a small red ribbon with a white card attached. Rose covered her mouth, holding her breath as she slowly took the card. "Sometimes your smile disappears when the stage lights go out. I hope this little one can help keep it alive. Bruno." Tears instantly streamed down Rose's face before she could stop them. Her fingers gently touched the puppy's soft fur, feeling the small warmth that brought comfort, like a beam of light breaking into the empty space in her heart that she had hidden for so long. She lifted the puppy into her arms, and the tiny creature immediately pressed its cold nose against her cheek. Rose let out a soft laugh between her tears, a sound she had not heard from herself in a very long time. Yet behind that happiness, shadows from her past began creeping into her thoughts. Rose had always carried a deep fear of loss. Since childhood, she had grown used to hiding her pain behind a perfect smile. Fame, massive concerts, and bright spotlights had never truly erased the loneliness quietly growing inside her. She stared at the card again, remembering her last conversation with Bruno a few weeks earlier. They had been sitting in Bruno's recording studio in Los Angeles. Bruno had noticed the subtle changes in her expression, something others failed to see. Rose often laughed at his jokes, but her eyes no longer reflected the same spark. "Why do you always look like you're holding something back?" Bruno had asked at the time. Rose had simply smiled and changed the subject, her usual habit whenever someone tried to look too deeply into her mind. Now, standing in her silent apartment with the small puppy in her arms, Rose realized that Bruno might have seen far more than she had ever imagined. The puppy barked softly, pulling Rose back to reality. She stroked its small head and whispered gently, trying to calm both herself and the tiny creature. She stepped inside the apartment, closed the door, and turned on the warm living room lights. The soft yellow glow reflected across the wooden floor, creating an atmosphere that felt more alive than usual. Rose sat on the couch, watching the puppy as it playfully chewed on the tip of its red ribbon. She laughed softly again, feeling something unfamiliar yet comforting grow inside her chest. She picked up her phone and stared at the screen for several seconds before pressing Bruno's name. The call connected faster than she expected. "Looks like my package has arrived." Bruno's voice sounded relaxed yet hopeful. Rose didn't answer immediately. She simply lifted the puppy closer to her face and closed her eyes briefly. "Why did you do this?" she finally asked, her voice trembling softly. On the other end, Bruno fell silent for a few seconds. Rose could hear the gentle sound of a piano playing in the background, Bruno's habit of playing random melodies while thinking. "Because I know you're never truly alone, but you often feel like you are," Bruno replied quietly. Those words struck Rose deeper than she expected. She stared at the large window of her apartment, watching city lights shimmer like stars fallen onto the earth. For years, she had always felt she needed to be strong, perfect, and the best version of herself for everyone, yet rarely had anyone asked if she was truly okay. The puppy licked the tip of her finger, making Rose smile unconsciously. "I don't know what to name her," she said softly. Bruno chuckled lightly. "I'm sure you'll find the perfect name. You've always had a way of seeing beauty in small things." Their conversation continued lightly, filled with laughter and simple stories, but deep inside Rose's heart, an emotional storm was slowly calming. She began to feel that maybe, for the first time, she didn't have to face everything alone. The following days transformed into a new routine. The puppy, whom she eventually named Lumi, became a tiny shadow that followed her everywhere. Lumi had a unique habit of barking whenever Rose sang high notes, as if trying to sing along. That habit often made Rose laugh during her vocal practice at home. But the happiness also brought new fears. Rose began realizing how quickly she had grown attached to Lumi. She feared losing again, feared feeling the emptiness that had haunted her in the past. Several times, she even woke up in the middle of the night just to make sure Lumi was still sleeping peacefully in her small basket. One afternoon, while Rose sat on the balcony writing lyrics for a new song, she noticed something different. The song she was writing felt unlike anything she had created before. The words were more honest, more fragile and warmer. Lumi slept on her lap, its tiny breathing steady, creating a soothing rhythm. Rose realized that the gift was not just a puppy. It was a bridge slowly opening the part of herself she had locked away for so long. A few weeks later, Bruno visited her apartment. When the door opened, Lumi immediately ran toward him, barking excitedly. Bruno laughed and knelt down, lifting Lumi lovingly into his arms. "Looks like she's forgotten who fed her first," Bruno teased. Rose smiled, watching the scene with emotions she struggled to describe. There was warmth, there was peace, and there was a small fear she tried to ignore. They sat together in the living room, talking about music, concert plans, and childhood memories. Bruno shared how he had always wanted to have a dog, but never had the chance because of his busy touring schedule. Rose listened carefully, realizing how many similarities they shared in hiding loneliness behind their busy lives. As the night grew deeper, Rose watched Bruno playing with Lumi on the living room floor. She felt something shifting inside her. She began to understand that love didn't always come in grand, dramatic gestures. Sometimes love arrived in simple forms, like a cardboard box on her doorstep during the rain, or a small creature that barked happily every time she came home. Rose leaned back against the couch and let out a long breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Not because of camera flashes, not because of the applause of thousands of fans, but because of the presence of two beings who made her apartment finally feel like home. The night ended with soft laughter and gentle music played by Bruno on Rose's small piano. Lumi fell asleep between them, its breathing calm, as if symbolizing something new beginning. And deep inside Rose's heart, the smile she once wore as a mask slowly transformed into a smile that was truly real, born from the warmth she finally allowed to grow in her life. The morning sunlight slipped through the tall glass windows of Rose's apartment, painting golden streaks across the living room floor. Lumi was already awake, scratching softly at Bruno's shoe while he lay half asleep on the couch, one arm draped over his face as if trying to shield himself from the brightness. Rose stood near the kitchen counter, watching them while stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, her mind drifting between comfort and unease she couldn't fully explain. "Your dog is attacking my dignity," Bruno groaned without moving. "She's not my dog," Rose replied automatically, though her voice softened as she glanced toward Lumi. "She's our responsibility." Bruno lowered his arm and looked directly at her, his expression suddenly serious. "That sounds dangerously close to commitment, Rose." The air between them shifted. Rose turned away quickly, pretending to focus on her coffee machine, but her heartbeat betrayed her calm exterior. She hated how easily Bruno could disrupt her carefully constructed emotional walls. "Don't start analyzing my word choices this early in the morning," she said, forcing a light tone. "I'm not analyzing," Bruno replied, sitting up slowly. "I'm listening." Rose set her cup down harder than she intended. The faint clink echoed through the quiet apartment, amplifying the tension neither of them acknowledged out loud. Lumi barked excitedly, sensing the change in atmosphere, then ran toward Rose, wagging her tail as if trying to mediate the moment. Bruno stood and walked toward the balcony, his silhouette framed by the morning light. "You know, you do this thing," he said casually. Rose sighed. "What thing?" "You laugh, you joke, you deflect. But when someone gets close to asking how you really feel, you shut down like a locked studio door." Rose crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. Maybe because not everything needs to be opened. Bruno turned around, his eyes sharp but not angry. Or maybe because you're afraid of what happens when it is. The words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She stared at him, her chest tightening as old memories flickered behind her eyes. Rooms filled with arguments, promises broken, people walking away when she needed them most. She swallowed hard, forcing those images back into the dark corners of her mind. "You think you know me because you gave me a puppy?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt to sound cold. Bruno stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I think I know you because I pay attention when everyone else is distracted by the spotlight around you." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Rose looked down at Lumi, who had begun chewing the edge of a rug, completely oblivious to the emotional storm unfolding above her. "You shouldn't get involved with someone like me," Rose said quietly. Bruno frowned. "Someone like you." "Someone who doesn't know how to stay," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Bruno exhaled slowly, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "That's not an identity, Rose. That's fear." She turned sharply, anger flashing across her face. "You don't get to decide what my fears are. And you don't get to use them as an excuse to push people away," Bruno shot back. The words hung in the air like sparks waiting to ignite something bigger. Rose felt her pulse racing, her emotions spiraling between anger and vulnerability. She hated arguments, yet something about Bruno made her incapable of walking away from them. "You're not the first person who thought they could stay," she said, her voice cracking. "You won't be the last person who realizes they can't." Bruno stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from frustration to something softer, almost painful. "You think I'm here because it's easy." Rose didn't answer. "I'm here because every time you sing, I hear someone trying to be strong for everyone except herself," Bruno continued. "And it drives me crazy because I know you deserve someone who stays when the music stops." Rose's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away stubbornly. Lumi trotted between them, barking playfully as if trying to break the tension. Bruno bent down and picked her up, holding the puppy close to his chest while still looking at Rose. "She misses you when you disappear into your thoughts," he said gently. "I do too." The confession landed like a sudden thunderclap in Rose's chest. She stepped back, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as if steadying herself against an invisible wave. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated violently on the counter. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. The caller ID displayed her manager's name, flashing insistently. Rose answered, her voice automatically shifting into professional calm. "Hello." "Have you seen the news?" her manager asked sharply. "What news?" There was a pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "There are photos of you and Bruno circulating online. Him staying overnight, the puppy, the balcony shots, it's everywhere." Rose's breath caught. She turned slowly toward Bruno, who was already watching her, his expression darkening with understanding. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "Bad enough that sponsors are calling," her manager replied, "and some of them are not happy." The call ended shortly after, leaving Rose standing motionless. The room suddenly felt colder, the warm sunlight no longer comforting but exposing. Bruno placed Lumi down gently and stepped closer. "Let me guess," he said softly. "Scandal season." Rose laughed bitterly. "Welcome to my life." Bruno folded his arms. "So what now?" "Now," she said, forcing composure, "I do damage control." "And where does that leave me?" he asked. Rose hesitated. The question pierced deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, searching for an answer that wouldn't hurt him or herself. "It leaves you safe," she finally said. Bruno stared at her as if she had slapped him. "Safe from what?" "From being dragged into something that could destroy both our careers," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Bruno shook his head slowly, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're trying to protect me by erasing me." "That's not what I'm doing," Rose insisted. "It's exactly what you're doing," he said, his voice rising. "You're building another wall and pretending it's for my benefit." Rose felt anger surge again, fueled by panic and exhaustion. "You don't understand the pressure I live under. And you don't understand that I chose to be here knowing that pressure exists," Bruno fired back. Their voices echoed through the apartment, startling Lumi, who whimpered softly and ran toward the corner. Rose noticed immediately and felt guilt stab through her chest. She walked over and picked the puppy up, holding her close as if seeking comfort from the tiny heartbeat against her palm. "I can't lose everything I've worked for," Rose said quietly, her voice trembling. Bruno softened slightly, his anger melting into frustration. "And you think caring about someone automatically means losing everything?" Rose didn't respond, but her silence spoke louder than words. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. Bruno sat by the window, staring at the city skyline while Rose remained in the bedroom, trying to draft statements with her manager. Lumi wandered between them restlessly, sensing the fracture growing inside the apartment. By late afternoon, Rose stepped back into the living room. Bruno didn't turn around when he heard her footsteps. "They want me to deny everything," she said softly. Bruno nodded once. "I figured. They said it's the safest option." "And what do you want?" he asked. Rose hesitated again, the familiar battle raging inside her. Her career, her image, her fear of abandonment, and the fragile warmth Bruno had brought into her life collided violently in her mind. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. Bruno finally turned to face her, his expression raw and vulnerable. "For once, Rose, not knowing is okay, but pretending you don't feel anything, that's not." Tears slid down her cheeks silently. She didn't wipe them away this time. Lumi barked softly from her arms, as if encouraging her to speak the truth she had buried for years. "I'm terrified," Rose whispered. Bruno stepped closer, his voice gentler than it had been all day. "Of losing your career." Rose shook her head slowly. "Of losing someone who stays," she confessed. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt fragile rather than hostile. Bruno reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face with hesitant tenderness. Rose closed her eyes briefly, leaning into the touch before realizing how deeply she had let him into her guarded world. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, echoing the storm still building inside her heart. Yet for the first time, Rose didn't feel entirely alone facing it. The storm outside finally broke just after sunset, rain crashing violently against the tall windows of Rose's apartment, as if the sky itself had decided to release everything it had been holding back. Inside, the air felt thick with emotions that neither Rose nor Bruno had fully resolved. Lumi paced restlessly across the living room, her small paws tapping against the wooden floor, sensing the fragile calm that hovered between them. Rose stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched lightning tear across the dark sky. The reflection of her face in the glass looked unfamiliar to her, vulnerable, conflicted, and tired of pretending she had everything under control. Behind her, Bruno sat at the piano, pressing random keys absent-mindedly, creating soft, disjointed notes that mirrored the chaos both of them felt. "You're going to catch a cold standing there like that," Bruno said quietly without looking up. Rose didn't move. "I've stood in worse storms." Bruno stopped playing. The silence that followed felt louder than the thunder outside. "I'm not talking about the weather." Rose turned slowly, her expression tightening. "Then stop talking like you understand everything I'm going through." Bruno stood up, his patience visibly thinning. "I never said I understood everything, but I'm trying to understand you, and you keep slamming the door in my face." Rose's chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to keep her composure. "You don't know what it's like to have your entire life dissected by strangers." Bruno laughed bitterly. "You think I do? Rose, I've had rumors about me since before you even met me. The difference is, I stopped letting them dictate who I'm allowed to care about." The words hit her like a slap. She stepped closer, anger and fear swirling together. "Easy for you to say. You've always controlled your narrative. Mine has been controlled by expectations since the moment I stepped into this industry." Bruno shook his head. "No, Rose, you're still letting them control it now." Her eyes flashed with frustration. "And what would you have me do? Risk everything because I feel something I don't even fully understand yet?" Bruno's jaw tightened. Feelings don't need to be fully understood to be real. Rain slammed harder against the glass, as if the world outside was echoing their rising voices. Lumi whimpered softly and crawled under the coffee table, her ears flattening against her head. Rose noticed but didn't move to comfort her, her focus locked on Bruno. "You're asking me to choose between my life and whatever this is." Bruno stepped closer until they were only inches apart. "I'm asking you to stop pretending they're separate things." Rose's breath caught. She could see every flicker of emotion in Bruno's eyes: frustration, longing, fear, and something dangerously close to heartbreak. "You're reckless," she whispered. "And you're terrified," he shot back immediately. The tension between them crackled like electricity, both of them standing on the edge of saying something they couldn't take back. Rose turned away abruptly, running her fingers through her hair as she paced across the room. "You don't understand," she said again, though her voice was weaker now. "If this gets bigger, they'll tear us apart. They'll dig into everything, my past, your past. They'll twist every moment we've shared." Bruno watched her carefully. "What part of your past scares you that much?" Rose froze mid-step. The question lingered in the air like a forbidden door being forced open. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling into fists. "You don't want to know," she said quietly. "Yes, I do," Bruno replied firmly. She turned back toward him, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "When I was younger, someone promised me they would stay no matter what. They said fame wouldn't change anything. And then the first time things got complicated, they left. They said loving me felt like living inside a spotlight that never turned off." Bruno's expression softened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "They told me I was too much," Rose whispered. "Too busy, too emotional, too impossible to love without losing yourself." The confession hung heavily between them. The rain outside softened slightly, as if the storm itself was listening. "And you believed them," Bruno said gently. Rose laughed bitterly. "I lived it." Bruno stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I'm not them." "You don't know that," she replied quickly, fear flashing across her face. "You think you're different now because everything feels exciting and new. But what happens when it stops being easy? When the cameras follow you everywhere? When your music gets overshadowed by gossip about us?" Bruno's eyes darkened with intensity. "You think I care more about headlines than about you?" "I think you don't realize how cruel this world can be," she said, her voice rising again. "And I think you're using that cruelty as an excuse to never let anyone truly stand beside you," Bruno countered. Rose stared at him, her breathing uneven. The truth in his words burned deeper than she wanted to admit. She turned toward the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as memories flooded her mind. Lonely hotel rooms, fake smiles at award shows, relationships that faded the moment they became inconvenient. Behind her, Bruno spoke again, his voice raw. "You know what's controversial? It's not two artists caring about each other. It's how easily people convince themselves they don't deserve something real." Rose closed her eyes tightly. "Stop making this sound simple." "It's not simple," Bruno replied. "It's terrifying, but so is losing something before you even try to hold on to it." Lumi suddenly barked loudly, startling both of them. The puppy ran toward the door, her tail wagging nervously as someone knocked sharply from outside. Rose frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "Were you expecting someone?" Bruno asked. She shook her head slowly. The knocking came again, louder, more urgent. Rose approached the door cautiously, her heartbeat accelerating. She glanced through the security screen and felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" Bruno asked, stepping closer. "Press," she whispered. Before she could react, voices erupted from the hallway, camera flashes flickering through the frosted glass panel beside the door. Questions were shouted rapidly, overlapping in chaotic bursts. "Rose, is Bruno staying with you? Are you two dating? Is this a publicity stunt? Did the puppy come from him?" Rose stumbled back, panic flooding her veins. Bruno immediately moved in front of her instinctively, his protective stance rigid and unyielding. "They shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "They shouldn't," Bruno agreed, his tone darkening. The banging intensified, the noise echoing through the apartment like an invasion. Lumi barked frantically, running circles around Rose's legs. Rose grabbed her phone, her hands shaking violently as she tried to call her manager again. It rang endlessly before going to voicemail. She cursed under her breath, frustration and fear colliding inside her chest. "They're not going to leave," she said, her voice breaking. Bruno turned toward her, his eyes steady despite the chaos. "Then we decide what happens next, not them." Rose stared at him, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. The flashes of cameras seeped through the edges of the door, creating bursts of white light that made the apartment feel like it was under siege. "They'll destroy us," she whispered. Bruno shook his head slowly. "They'll try, but they only win if we destroy ourselves first." The pounding on the door suddenly stopped, replaced by muffled arguing in the hallway. Rose's heart hammered as she listened to the shifting noise outside. For a brief moment, everything fell eerily quiet. She looked at Bruno, her eyes filled with fear, hope, and exhaustion all at once. Lumi whimpered softly in her arms, pressing closer to her chest. "What if I'm not strong enough for this?" Rose asked, her voice barely audible. Bruno stepped closer, his expression unwavering. "Then we learn how to be strong together." The thunder outside rolled again, louder than before, rattling the glass windows as if the storm refused to fade. Rose felt the weight of every decision she had avoided pressing down on her shoulders. Yet as she stood there, inches away from Bruno, she realized something inside her was shifting, something fragile and terrifying and alive. And for the first time, she wondered if running from the storm had only kept her from discovering who she could become if she finally chose to stand inside it.